The awakening of Earth's Dragon-Soul. In the midst of Earth's most brutal Arctic winter, Dr. Elena Santos stood at the edge of what could be the most revolutionary discovery in human history. The excavation site was a vast, frozen chasm illuminated by floodlights, revealing the depth and mystery of the object buried beneath the thick ice. She had spent weeks here with her team, uncovering an ancient relic that defied every known law of science. The object was a perfect sphere, 30 meters in diameter, its surface pitch black yet alive, rippling like liquid under the pale moonlight. Dr. James Chen's voice crackled over the radio, filled with urgency. Energy levels are off the charts, Elena. The more we uncover, the more it activates. It's like it's waking up. Elena could feel it in her bones. Each day, the sphere seemed to react more intensely, its energy pulsing in a way that no one could explain. She adjusted her thermal suit and continued her careful descent down the reinforced scaffolding towards the heart of the excavation. The ice, once solid and unmoving, now hummed with strange vibrations, a sign that whatever lay beneath was far more than an ordinary object. Alpha 7 approach, Elena commanded. This would be their 7th attempt at direct interaction with the sphere. As she approached, she saw it again, flickers of intricate patterns swirling across its surface. They reminded her of brain scans, a complex network of energy pulsing in a way that suggested communication. The temperature around her plummeted sharply. Her suit's sensors warned of a sudden 10-degree drop, but Elena barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the sphere, which now seemed to shimmer with a new, eerie clarity. The patterns on its surface grew more intricate, as if the object itself was alive, responding to her proximity, to her thoughts. "Something's happening," she whispered, her breath fogging in the freezing air. As she stepped closer, the surface stilled for a brief moment. And then, it happened. A massive flash of light exploded from the sphere, engulfing her in a cascade of color and energy. The light was so bright that it seemed to etch itself into her mind, a burning imprint of something both terrifying and beautiful. As the light faded, Elena found herself gazing into the smooth, glass-like surface. But instead of her reflection, she saw something unimaginable. An enormous chamber, filled with technology far beyond human understanding. The vision vanished almost instantly, replaced by the sound of James' frantic voice. "Elena, what's going on down there? Your sensors just went offline. Are you all right?" Before Elena could respond, the sphere's surface cracked open. In an instant, a pulse of energy shot out, spiraling into the walls of ice surrounding them. The cavern was alive with data, flowing like an intricate network of energy, each light pulse growing brighter as if trying to communicate. "James," Elena's voice trembled with awe. It's trying to teach me something." High above Earth, in the cold vacuum of space, the alien species known as the Xerax had been monitoring humanity for centuries. But nothing had prepared them for what they were seeing now. Aboard their cloaked observation vessel, Zix 427, the first observer felt a chill that had nothing to do with the vacuum of space. "Confirm the readings," Zix ordered, his multiple sensory appendages trembling. His crystalline form radiated anxiety. The energy signature emanating from Earth was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It matched the forbidden pattern Alpha 0, one that had been lost to the galaxy for millennia. A nexus core. And now, impossibly, it was on Earth. A second observer responded, their voice laced with panic. "The humans. They've discovered it." Zix 427 felt a surge of dread. Nexus cores were legendary, self-aware technologies left behind by a long-extinct precursor race. The artifacts were meant to elevate a species to unimaginable heights, but only for those deemed worthy. The Xerax had searched the galaxy for centuries, finding nothing. And now, on Earth, a planet barely out of its stone age in the grand scheme of things, humans had stumbled upon one. Back at the excavation site, Elena stood frozen in place, staring at the now active sphere. The entire cavern had transformed into something unrecognizable. Walls of ice had become displays, streaming data in a language that was both foreign and oddly familiar. Elena felt the words forming in her mind, a strange clarity washing over her as the sphere began to communicate in a way that transcended mere signals. "I can read it," Elena murmured. "It's teaching me how to understand it. It's connecting with me." James, still monitoring from the surface, was speechless. "Impossible," he breathed, though his disbelief was filled with wonder. "The ice. It's restructuring itself. At a quantum level, this whole cavern is becoming a machine," Elena finished for him. The cavern wasn't just a structure. It was a living system, interconnected and alive. She felt the sphere's presence again, brushing against her consciousness, inviting, not invasive. It wasn't just sending information. It was offering a partnership, a shared understanding. And for the first time, Elena realized what she was standing in front of: the doorway to humanity's greatest potential. And just as quickly as the vision appeared, the ice walls suddenly erupted in brilliant light. For a moment, Elena was consumed by it, her body and mind overwhelmed by the sheer force of what was happening. She had no idea how long it lasted, but when the light finally dimmed, she knew this wasn't just a discovery, it was an awakening. And somewhere in the cold expanse of space, the Zaracs were watching, terrified by what humanity had just uncovered. The Zarac strike, humanity's hidden strength. The light from the Nexus core flickered and dimmed, its pulse synchronizing with Elena's heartbeat. She stood there, frozen in a mixture of awe and fear, as the cavern seemed to hum with an energy she could feel deep in her bones. It was as though the very air around her had changed. The patterns on the ice walls were no longer just data. They were instructions, blueprints, a language that humanity had no way of interpreting, yet somehow felt intimately familiar. "Elena," came James's voice again, now thick with tension. "The sphere, it's not just sending data. It's alive. It's reacting to you. What's happening down there?" Elena could hear the panic in his voice, but she was too immersed in the experience to respond right away. Her mind raced as the sphere's energy intensified, the alien words on the walls becoming clearer, more structured. In an instant, she understood the flow of information. It wasn't just knowledge. It was a roadmap to something far greater. The Nexus core was not simply a technological marvel. It was a key to something far beyond anything Earth had ever known. But even as she began to grasp the enormity of what was unfolding, she felt an overwhelming sense of urgency, a quiet pressure, as though the sphere was pushing her, urging her to do something. The temperature around her dropped again, and her suit's sensors went wild with readings. "James, I think it's reacting to my thoughts," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I can feel it, like it's guiding me." High above in the silent cold of space, the Zaracs were not so calm. The observation vessel, Eternal Vigilance, trembled as its occupants struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Zix 427, the first observer, was still reeling from the discovery. His mind raced through ancient records, but nothing could prepare him for the horror of what the humans had just uncovered. "The Nexus core," Zix repeated, his voice a low rasp. "It's active. On Earth. The humans have found it." His second in command, a smaller, jittery Zarax, clicked his mandibles nervously. It was never meant to be discovered. It was a myth. We weren't ready. This could ruin everything. Zix's many eyes glowed brighter with an eerie alien light. "The humans are not ready either," he muttered darkly. "And yet, they are using it." He tapped a claw against his console as his crew scrambled to confirm the readings again. "Deploy the fleet. We need to contain this. Now." For centuries, the Zaracs had carefully monitored Earth, watching the humans evolve from primitive creatures to the brink of space travel. But they had always believed that humanity would never rise to the level of the precursors, the ancient, godlike beings who had left the Nexus cores behind. The Jarax knew that the cores were powerful, self-aware, and capable of changing the very fabric of a species. But they also knew something else. Only the most advanced civilizations were supposed to activate them. The Nexus core was a weapon, but it was also a test. Only those deemed worthy could access its potential. If the humans had found it, then they had passed some threshold, but whether that was a blessing or a curse, Zix didn't know. Back at the excavation site, Elena's mind raced as the patterns on the walls continued to change, shifting in real time as if responding directly to her thoughts. The walls of ice around her seemed to pulse with life, the light within them growing brighter, more intense. It was as though the entire cavern was becoming a neural network, a vast, interconnected system that was alive, adapting, and learning. Suddenly, the sphere itself reacted. The core in the center of the sphere began to pulse with a golden light that bathed the entire cavern. Elena took a step back as the energy surged outward, wrapping around her like an invisible current. For a moment, her body felt weightless, as if she were floating in a sea of pure energy. "James, I don't know what's happening, but it's like it's connecting with me on a deeper level." Elena gasped, her voice distant, as though she were speaking from a dream. Her suit's sensors were overloaded with information. The Nexus core wasn't just a source of energy, it was a conduit, amplifying Elena's own thoughts and emotions. She could sense the presence of something greater, an intelligence beyond her comprehension, reaching out and communicating with her directly. The sphere was not just teaching her, it was awakening something inside of her, something ancient and primal. Then, without warning, everything stopped. The energy ceased, the patterns on the walls frozen in place. Elena blinked, disoriented, as her mind began to clear. But she knew something had changed. The Nexus core had made contact, and it had chosen her. Above her, in the cold expanse of space, the Jarax fleet had arrived. A dozen warships, cloaked and silent, hovered above the Earth's atmosphere, invisible to all human sensors. But the fleet was not invisible to the Nexus core. As soon as the Jarax ships entered the system, a pulse of energy shot out from the core, a powerful resonating wave that rippled through space itself. The signal was unmistakable, and it reached the Jarax warships with a sudden, terrifying clarity. "Shut it down," Zix ordered. "Activate the suppression field. The humans cannot be allowed to control it." But the Jarax were too late. The Nexus core had already begun to react to their presence. As they tried to activate their jamming systems, their ships were struck by an electromagnetic surge so powerful that their shields began to flicker and fail. For the first time in centuries, the Jarax realized that they were facing a force they could not control. The humans had unlocked something the Jarax never intended them to find. And now, Elena Santos, with her newfound connection to the Nexus core, was at the center of it all. The Jarax's arrival marks the beginning of a high-stakes conflict between human ingenuity and alien domination. The humans now hold a power they are only beginning to understand, but the Jarax will stop at nothing to reclaim it. How will Elena navigate this new power? And what will it mean for humanity's future? The Dragon-Soul awakens, humanity's first strike. The cold Arctic night had never seemed so alive. The once desolate, frozen landscape now pulsed with energy, as though the Earth itself was awakening. Elena stood at the heart of the excavation site, staring at the swirling patterns inside the cavern, her mind still reeling from the overwhelming flood of information. The Nexus core had chosen her. But what did that mean? What had she unlocked, and how would humanity react when they learned of it? Her mind buzzed with the fragments of alien knowledge now embedded in her thoughts, visions of technologies, star maps, and the history of the ancient precursors who had created the Nexus cores. But there was more, something deeper, a resonance within her that she couldn't explain. The sphere had not just connected with her mind. It had connected with something else, something ancient within the very core of humanity. For the first time, Elena understood the significance of the Nexus core. It wasn't just a tool. It was a weapon, but it was also a symbol of something far greater, a destiny that had been waiting for humanity all along. And now, humanity was no longer just a species crawling on a small planet in the vastness of space. They were poised to become something more, something powerful. "James," Alina said, her voice steady, but filled with a sense of urgency. "We need to prepare. The Zerax are coming." From above, the Zerax fleet loomed like a dark shadow. Zix 427, the first observer, stared at the human planet with a mix of dread and disbelief. His people had carefully monitored Earth for centuries, but they had never imagined that the humans would find the Nexus core. The Zerax had believed the humans were too primitive, too young to comprehend its power. But now, the humans had done the unthinkable. They had activated it. "The humans have made contact," Zix murmured to his crew. "And they are already using it. They have no idea what they've unleashed. We must stop them, or everything we have worked for will be undone." But the Zerax were not the only ones watching. The Nexus core had stirred the attention of others in the galaxy. Other species, some hostile, some curious. The warships now in orbit above Earth were only the beginning. Soon, others would come, seeking to claim what was now humanity's. Back on Earth, Alina felt the presence of the Nexus core again, its energy flowing through her, guiding her thoughts. She could sense the Zerax fleet as they hovered just beyond Earth's atmosphere. Their ships cloaked in stealth, but the core's power had already begun to adapt to the threat. The Earth, it seemed, had its own defenses now, activated by the Nexus core's awakening. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath her boots. The ice began to crack and shift, as if responding to the pulse of energy coming from the core. The walls of the cavern lit up in a radiant blue light, and Alina realized, with a jolt, that it was not just the core that was alive. It was the planet itself. She stepped back as a low hum began to rise from deep within the Earth's crust. The energy in the cavern intensified, and the ice began to reshape itself, forming into something new, something that should have been impossible. From the very ground beneath her, a massive shape began to emerge. It was metallic, gleaming in the light of the Nexus energy, and its form was unmistakable. A dragon, its wings spread wide, its body coiled in an ancient, almost mythical design. "Alina, what is that?" James's voice crackled through her comms, filled with shock. "What's happening down there?" "I don't know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's alive." The Dragon-Soul, as she would come to call it, rose from the earth like a titan. It was not made of flesh and bone, but of some kind of living metal, an artifact of unimaginable power, forged by the precursors themselves. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intelligence, and its wings stretched across the cavern, casting shadows that seemed to flicker with ancient fire. For a moment, Alina felt a strange connection with the dragon. It was as if they were linked, as if the dragon's soul and the Nexus core shared the same ancient consciousness. And now, humanity had inherited that power. The dragon's eyes focused on her, and Alina felt a surge of energy course through her, as if the creature recognized her as its master. She could feel the weight of the responsibility, of the power she now commanded, but she also felt the stirring of something deeper. This was not just about defense. It was about the awakening of humanity's true potential. In that moment, Alina understood. The Nexus core had not just chosen her, it had chosen humanity. Above, the Zerax fleet was preparing to strike. Zix 427's eyes narrowed as he watched the strange events unfolding on Earth. He could sense the power rising from the planet, and his instincts screamed that they had underestimated the humans. What they had discovered was more than just a technological marvel. It was a force that could change the entire balance of the galaxy. "Activate the suppression fields," Zix ordered. "We will not allow the humans to control this power." The Zerax fleet descended toward Earth, their weapons primed and ready. They were determined to prevent humanity from mastering the Nexus core. but they were not prepared for what was about to happen next. As the first Jurax ships entered Earth's atmosphere, the Dragon-Soul's wings flared, and a burst of golden energy shot into the sky. The energy collided with the Jurax fleet, sending shockwaves through space, disrupting their shields and causing their ships to veer off course. The dragon, now fully awakened, was no longer just a symbol, it was a weapon. Elena watched in awe as the dragon's energy swept through the atmosphere, striking the Jurax fleet with a force that left the aliens scrambling to regain control of their ships. It was as if the dragon's soul was protecting Earth, responding to the presence of the invaders. The Jurax had made a grave mistake. They had thought they were the ones with the power. But the dragon soul, fueled by the Nexus core, was something far more formidable. It was not just a defense mechanism, it was a force of nature. As the Jurax ships began to retreat, battered and shaken by the unexpected counterattack, Helena realized that humanity was no longer a mere observer in the cosmic game. With the dragon soul at their side, they had become a power to be reckoned with. The battle had only just begun. The dragon soul's rage, humanity's reckoning. The sky above the Arctic excavation site had turned an unnatural shade of purple, as if the very atmosphere had been twisted by the energy coursing through the earth. Elena stood on the edge of the cavern, her eyes wide with both wonder and fear, staring at the dragon soul that now hovered above the ground, its massive wings rippling with radiant energy. The creature's body shimmered like liquid metal, its form pulsating in sync with the beat of the Nexus core. It was a living weapon, a force of unimaginable power, and it was bonded to humanity. For a moment, everything was still. Then the dragon soul let out a deafening roar that reverberated through the ice, shaking the ground beneath Elena's feet. The sound was unlike anything she had ever heard, a blend of primal fury and ancient sorrow. It was as if the creature itself was calling to the very forces of the earth, summoning something deep within the planet, something older than any civilization, something that had slumbered for eons. Elena could feel the power of the dragon soul surge through her like a flood, a torrent of energy that threatened to overwhelm her senses. She steadied herself, focusing on the connection, on the bond that had been forged between her and the Nexus core. The dragon wasn't just a guardian, it was her ally, her companion in this new and uncertain future. But that future was now under attack. Up above, the Jurax fleet was regrouping. Zix 427 watched in disbelief as his ships were forced to retreat, their shields battered by the unexpected energy pulses from the dragon soul. The humans had tapped into something far beyond their comprehension, and the Jurax were beginning to realize the full extent of the threat. "Prepare the second wave," Zix ordered through gritted mandibles. His crew had no choice but to comply, but their hesitation was palpable. The energy they had just encountered was unlike anything they had ever faced. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. "We can't just bombard them from orbit," one of Zix's officers protested. "The energy signature, this Nexus core, it's too volatile. We don't know what will happen if we push too hard." Zix's many eyes narrowed. "Then we will bring the full force of the Jurax to the ground." No more hesitation. The first wave had been a reconnaissance strike, meant to test humanity's defenses. Now, the Jurax were preparing for an all-out assault. Their warships were capable of devastating entire continents with the flick of a switch, and they planned to make Earth's surface a battlefield. Back at the excavation site, Elena felt a new urgency. She watched the dragon soul twist and coil in the air, its wings outstretched, its eyes glowing with an intense, fiery light. She could feel its rage, a rage not just for the attack on Earth, but for the centuries of silence, of waiting. The dragon soul was not just a weapon. It was a reflection of the planet's own will to survive. "James, we need to act fast," Elena said, her voice urgent. "The Jurax are coming for us. And this time, they're bringing everything they've got." James's voice crackled through the comms. "Understood. We're already moving the team into position. We've got the tech you requested. the new defense systems, the automated drones, and the pulse weapons. If we can coordinate with the Dragon-Soul, we may have a chance. Elena nodded, even though she knew he couldn't see her. It's more than just weapons. We need to harness the power of the Nexus core. If we can control the flow of energy, we can build a defense network that could take down their ships before they even land. The Dragon-Soul's wings fluttered, and the ground beneath Elena began to crack open once again. From deep within the Earth, the pulse of energy from the Nexus core was rising, and Elena could feel it resonate in her bones. It was as though the entire planet was gearing up for war. Then, without warning, the ground shook violently, and the ice cavern began to fracture. A deep rumbling sound reverberated through the walls of the excavation site, followed by a high-pitched whine, like the hum of a weapon charging. The Nexus core, in sync with the Dragon-Soul, was beginning to channel its energy outward, forming an invisible shield over the entire area. Suddenly, a burst of light erupted from the sky as the Zirax fleet descended. The first Zirax warship broke through the clouds, its cloaking device flickering off as it revealed its full size. A colossal vessel, bristling with weapons, capable of leveling entire cities. But as it entered Earth's atmosphere, it was met with an unexpected resistance. The pulse from the Nexus core struck the ship like a hammer, sending shockwaves through its shields. "Captain, we're losing power," a Zirax officer cried. "The energy from the planet. It's interfering with our systems." Zix 427 slammed his fist against the console. "Activate the suppression fields. Now." But it was too late. The Dragon-Soul, responding to the rising energy, unleashed a pulse of its own. A devastating wave of golden fire that tore through the atmosphere and struck the Zirax ship with such force that it was sent spiraling out of control. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure as it veered toward the ground, its shields barely holding. Elena watched the chaos unfold, her heart racing. The Dragon-Soul was defending Earth, and it was doing so with a fury that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The Zirax had no idea what they were up against. But even as the first warship was sent crashing down, the rest of the Zirax fleet pressed forward, undeterred. They were relentless, and they had brought more than just ships. They had brought an army. From the ground, Elena could see the shimmer of the Zirax landing forces, a fleet of sleek, armored troops, their weapons drawn, their eyes glowing with cold determination. The first wave of the invasion had begun. "Deploy the drones," Elena ordered, her voice calm despite the rising tension. "Activate the pulse weapons. We hold this ground, no matter what." Her team moved swiftly, setting up the automated defense systems, while Elena focused on the Dragon-Soul. She reached out with her mind, tapping into the core's energy and aligning her thoughts with the creature's power. The Nexus core responded, its energy flowing into her, amplifying her senses, and heightening her connection with the dragon. The ground trembled again as the Dragon-Soul let out another deafening roar. Its wings flared, sending a shockwave of energy outward, knocking back the first wave of Zirax troops. The dragon was fighting back with everything it had, but Elena knew this was only the beginning. The Zirax were coming in full force, and they would not stop until Earth was theirs. As the battle unfolded, Elena could feel the weight of her responsibility. Humanity had awakened something powerful, but now it had to fight to keep it. The stakes had never been higher, and the cost of failure was unimaginable. The awakening storm, humanity's unlikely allies. The battle raged on beneath the Arctic skies, a fierce clash of worlds, one fueled by ancient powers, the other driven by survival. The ground shook violently as the Zirax landed their first wave of soldiers, their armored suits gleaming under the oppressive moonlight. They were methodical, ruthless, their advanced weapons cutting through the landscape like a storm. But no storm could match the fury of the Nexus core, and the Dragon-Soul had only just begun to reveal its true power. Elena stood at the forefront, her heart racing, but her mind clear. The Dragon-Soul hovered above the excavation site, its enormous form bathed in a glowing aura. Its wings beat with a force that seemed to shift the very air around them, sending shockwaves that sent the Zerax soldiers tumbling backward. But even the dragon's might couldn't hold them off forever. The Zerax were relentless, and their numbers were overwhelming. "We can't keep them at bay like this," Alina said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. She watched as the first line of Zerax soldiers regrouped, their shields flashing as they began to advance again. James's voice came through the comms, calm and strategic. "We've got drones in position, and the pulse weapons are heating up, but it won't be enough to stop the full force. We need something more unexpected." Alina's mind raced. What could they use? What would catch the Zerax off guard? And then it hit her. There was something the Zerax hadn't counted on. Something they never imagined Earth could have. A deep rumbling shook the ground beneath her feet. She felt the energy of the Nexus core hum in her chest, its pulse resonating with her own heartbeat. As she turned to face the Dragon-Soul, she realized that they had only scratched the surface of its power. The Nexus core had not just awakened the dragon. It had awakened something else beneath the ice, an ancient force tied to Earth itself. "Alina, what's happening?" James asked through the comms, his voice crackling with static. "I think we've underestimated Earth," Alina said, a sudden, thrilling realization flooding through her. "The Dragon-Soul isn't the only thing we've awakened." From the depths of the Earth, a new wave of energy began to emerge, one that was not from the Nexus core alone. This energy was old, older than any civilization, older even than the precursors who had left behind the Nexus cores. It was the Earth's primal fury, a force that had been lying dormant for millennia, waiting for the moment when humanity would rise to awaken it. The ground beneath the excavation site split open, and from the chasm, a series of colossal figures began to rise, giant, stone-like creatures that seemed to pulse with the very essence of the planet. Their bodies were covered in a thick, rocky skin that glimmered with streaks of emerald energy. Their eyes glowed a deep, molten red, and their immense hands clenched into fists that could crush mountains. The ancient guardians had awoken. "Alina, what are those things?" James gasped. "They're Earth's ancient protectors," Alina said, her voice filled with awe. When the Nexus core activated, it didn't just stir the Dragon-Soul, it awakened the planet's guardians. These creatures were created to protect Earth from any force that threatened it, and they're here now. As the guardians rose from the ice, the Zerax soldiers took one look at the immense, towering figures and faltered for a moment. But their hesitation was short-lived. They were professionals, trained to fight any enemy, no matter the odds. They quickly adjusted, their advanced weapons locking onto the new threat. But they had no idea what they were up against. The Guardians charged forward, moving with a speed that belied their massive size. Their immense fists slammed into the ground, creating shockwaves that knocked the Zerax off their feet. The battle had taken a new turn, one that the Zerax were not prepared for. For all their technological superiority, they had never encountered a force like this. But even with the Guardians on their side, Alina knew that victory would not come easily. The Zerax had not come to Earth just to fight. They had come to conquer, and they were not going to leave without a fight. The Dragon-Soul's wings beat again, sending another pulse of energy outward. The Zerax fleet in the sky had begun to fire down on the excavation site, targeting the dragon and its newly awakened allies. But the energy from the Nexus core was too much. As the beams of light rained down, the Dragon-Soul unleashed another wave of golden fire, enveloping the Zerax warships in a blinding explosion of energy. Several ships plummeted from the sky, their shields failing under the weight of the attack. Yet the Zerax were relentless. Their fleet was vast, and they had far more weapons than Earth could ever dream of matching. And now, Alina realized, they were going to fight back with everything they had. The stakes had never been higher. "James," Alina said, her voice urgent, "we need to coordinate. The Guardians can hold the ground, but we need to strike their ships. Take down their fleet. We can't let them regroup." James was silent for a moment, processing the gravity of the situation. "Roger that. We'll need the pulse weapons online now. I'll have the drones fire on the remaining ships while you focus on the ground forces." As the drones activated, their weapons flaring to life, Elena felt the weight of humanity's responsibility press down on her shoulders. She wasn't just defending Earth anymore. She was leading a fight to determine humanity's place in the galaxy. She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on the connection she now shared with the Dragon-Soul and the Guardians. She could feel their thoughts, ancient, primal, and filled with purpose. The Nexus core had awakened more than just the Earth's protectors. It had awakened humanity's potential. As the Zerax soldiers regrouped, their weapons aimed at the towering Guardians, Elena knew this was the moment. Humanity was no longer a passive player in the cosmic struggle. They had become a force to be reckoned with. But there was one more twist to the battle that neither side had anticipated. Far from the battlefield, in the dark recesses of the galaxy, another species had taken notice of Earth's newfound power. A species older than even the Zerax, one that had been watching the rise of humanity with great interest. And now, with the Nexus core fully awakened and humanity wielding unimaginable power, they knew the time had come. The Dragon-Soul had not only stirred the Earth, it had awakened the attention of the galaxy. The silent threat, humanity's last stand. The sky over the Arctic battlefield had become a war zone, filled with the debris of fallen warships and the blinding flashes of energy pulses that ripped through the air. The ground trembled underfoot as the Zerax forces, battered but unyielding, regrouped for another assault. The Dragon-Soul, now in full combat mode, flapped its massive wings, sending pulses of golden fire toward the sky, obliterating any remaining Zerax ships that dared to descend. But despite the overwhelming force of Earth's ancient guardians and the dragon's fury, Elena knew that victory was not yet assured. From her vantage point atop the ice cliff, Elena could see the scene unfolding below. The Guardians had proven to be a formidable force, pushing back the Zerax foot soldiers with terrifying power. Each colossal fist strike crushed through armored Zerax bodies, sending them scattering in all directions. Yet, for all their strength, the Guardians were still limited, rooted to the Earth, their power directly tied to the planet's energy reserves, which, while vast, were not infinite. "Elena, we need to hold them off for just a little longer," James shouted over the comms. His voice was strained with effort, but there was a fierce determination behind it. "We've almost got the pulse cannons online, but we can't get a clear shot at their flagship from down here." The Zerax flagship, a massive craft that hovered ominously above the battlefield, had managed to stay just outside the range of the Nexus core's energy pulses. It was heavily shielded, with powerful antimatter cannons that could wipe out entire cities with a single blast. It was the heart of the Zerax invasion, and Elena knew that if they couldn't take it down, the battle would be lost. "James, I have a plan," Elena said, her voice resolute. "I'm going to need your support. I'll buy you some time." Before James could respond, Elena turned her attention to the Dragon-Soul. She had felt its presence growing stronger within her over the past hours, its connection to her becoming deeper, more intimate. The Dragon-Soul was not just a weapon. It was alive, sentient, and it seemed to understand what was at stake. With every beat of its wings, it poured more energy into the battlefield, but it was beginning to show signs of strain. The Nexus core was an incredibly powerful artifact, but even it had its limits. Elena closed her eyes and focused on the bond between herself and the Dragon-Soul. She reached out, extending her consciousness into the creature's vast, ancient mind. She could feel the pulse of its thoughts, like waves crashing against the shore, calm, steady, but tinged with an undercurrent of something ancient and profound. The Dragon-Soul was not just an ally. It was a part of Earth's living soul, a guardian born from the very core of the planet itself. "I need you," Elena thought, reaching deep into the dragon's consciousness. "Help me stop them. The Earth cannot fight alone." For a moment, there was silence. Then the Dragon Soul responded, not with words, but with a surge of raw energy that flooded Elena's mind. It was a feeling of shared purpose, a connection that transcended words. The Dragon Soul was with her, and together, they could do what no one else could. "James," Elena said, her voice steady, "I'm going in." Before he could object, Elena turned toward the Dragon Soul. With a swift motion, she pressed her hand against the icy ground. She could feel the energy of the Nexus core surge through her fingertips, and the earth itself seemed to bend in response. In an instant, the Dragon Soul descended, its massive form hovering just above the ground, the energy from the Nexus core crackling around it. "Elena, wait," James shouted, but she was already moving. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest as she approached the Dragon Soul. The creature's enormous eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Elena felt the full weight of its power. She was no longer just a human. It was as if the Dragon Soul had accepted her as one of its own, its energy coursing through her veins, strengthening her resolve. Without another word, Elena mounted the Dragon Soul, her fingers gripping the scales that now pulsed with radiant energy. The moment she touched the dragon's back, a surge of power shot through her, and she felt herself lifted into the air. The Zerax forces below, momentarily stunned by the sudden shift in the battle, turned their attention toward the new threat. The Dragon Soul spread its wings, and together they shot into the sky, leaving the battlefield behind. The Zerax, in their arrogance, had never anticipated humanity's true potential. They had underestimated the power that Earth itself could muster, unleashing the full fury of the Nexus core and the Dragon Soul. Now, Elena had one chance to end this. High above the battlefield, the Zerax flagship loomed, its dark form casting a shadow over the land. Elena could see it now, hovering just beyond the reach of the Nexus core's energy pulses. Its shields were glowing brightly, a deep, unnatural blue that flickered as the ship's defensive systems hummed with activity. "We're going to need to get closer," Elena muttered to herself. "But I'm not sure how close is safe." The Dragon Soul responded by shifting beneath her, its wings flapping with a renewed intensity as it soared higher, closing the distance to the flagship. As they approached, Elena's mind reached out again to the Nexus core, drawing as much power from it as she could muster. The energy crackled around them, forming a protective barrier that shielded them from the Zerax's retaliatory fire. They were close now, too close for the Zerax to react. With a single unified thought, Elena urged the Dragon Soul forward. The creature responded, its massive body twisting as it unleashed a torrent of golden fire from its mouth. The energy struck the flagship's shields with an earth-shattering force, causing the ship to shudder violently. The Zerax flagship's shields flickered and failed, and Elena felt the surge of victory rise in her chest. But before they could strike again, the flagship released a barrage of antimatter missiles, each one capable of obliterating anything in its path. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she watched the missiles tear through the sky, heading straight for them. In that instant, she knew that there was only one way to stop the Zerax. She pushed herself and the Dragon Soul to their limits, pushing every ounce of energy into their final attack. The Nexus core responded in kind, amplifying the Dragon Soul's fire to an intensity that could vaporize anything in its path. With a deafening roar, the Dragon Soul unleashed its full power, a wave of fire and energy so intense that it enveloped the entire flagship. The Zerax warship was consumed in a flash of light, its shields disintegrating and its hull cracking under the sheer force of the blast. The entire flagship collapsed in on itself, a chain reaction of explosions rippling through the ship's core. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the explosion sent shockwaves rippling across the battlefield below.